Hey everybody, welcome to Modscast. Hope everybody's doing well today. Just some thoughts on media after yesterday's Project Veritas video release, where the producer from CNN talks about how they are driving the Russian narrative because it makes the money, it's good for business. If you've had me in senior comp, or if you had me when I was at university teaching freshman comp, you know, I've talked about narratives, and it's easy to blame. I'm not here to point a finger at the media. That's because I'm a fan of laissez-faire capitalism. So the media makes decisions like a business. That's what businesses do. I wish they didn't, or I wish, no, because then they wouldn't be a business. So I guess I don't wish they didn't, but I think what I want to talk about is how it's incumbent upon us to demand product. Because what they do, like anybody who's in business, is they provide a product that people want, that people are willing to pay for. And I'm more interested in what it says about us as a society than I am as what it says about the media, since the media is downstream, with the product is downstream of the desires of the populace. Now, MSNBC is fairly open in their partisanship. They don't pretend to be offering an objective glance, and that at least is refreshing, because you can take it as such and then, you know, sift it. But and one could make the case probably that Fox News is the same way. Certainly someone like Sean Hannity is very clear that he's a right-wing guy, and presents his stuff that way. Now, again, you can disagree with him, but they're entitled to an opinion, and there's a group of people that want it. Now, what you don't want is people who are watching just one or just the other, and imagining that what they're getting there is facts. You know, too often people will act like their media is giving them the truth and the other one's lying. Okay, they're both lying. They're both giving it with a slant and a bias. It's human nature. We can't get past our biases. The possibility of objective media is a tricky business. But more importantly, this idea that we're supposed to look for narrative, that we want a narrative that affirms what we already think. This is human nature, to want the truth to be a function of desire. The truth is a function of desire too often, right? We see what we want to see, and then we want what we want to see, because we sit down to dinner and we're tired from a day of work or whatever, and then we sit and turn on the TV or go to media, and we want something that's going to tell us that we're okay, that our perception's right. We don't want to be bothered with it. And to be honest, the people in power count on that. Okay, it's bread and circuses or whatever, right? They count on you not wanting to pay enough attention to dig deeper. And if they can just affirm you in your convictions, then you'll turn off the TV and go to bed feeling self-righteous and, you know, and feeling like you're part of this story where it's us against them. Which is why alternative media, increasingly what I'm starting to realize is that people on YouTube, alternative media, and a lot of them are people who were on the left who are now coming around, not going to the right, but going, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because they were, for years, say during the Bush administration or during the Obama administration, right, attacking the right for being obstructionists and this and that and the other thing. But now they're seeing the left using these same tactics that they were decrying on the right, and they're starting to realize that this construction of narrative and adherence to narrative in the interest of making money and perpetuating power is a pernicious thing. It's a dangerous thing. But again, they're not. You can't blame them. I mean, there are people in power, I think some who are malicious, but if their job's to make money, they have to find a way and find a market. They're not supposed to pursue truth. They're supposed to make money. That's the job of a media outlet. Our business, our job is to sift through all the different things, even as it's our job to sift through all the different products and figure out the best one. Again, not by like what Consumer Reports can give us things and all, but really by experience. So word of mouth goes out, and, you know, if you want a smartphone, you got to do the Apple iPhone or whatever. Okay. But in the case of politics and news, we have to be willing to hear both sides. We have to understand that our desire to have things fit a narrative is very powerful. And that if we're not asking ourselves those questions before we're demanding all of these things from other people, this assumption that your narrative is the right one is the truth. There's a great deal of arrogance and egocentrism in there. And it's a dangerous business. As I've tried to point out from my perspective, the narrative that things are better than they were, for me, I know the narrative that things are better than they were, I don't think that's narrative. I think, again, historically, if you look at the things we've gotten past, in my last video I talked about the improvement, right? A culture that examines itself and improves itself. Not a perfect culture, but a culture that consistently examines itself and improves itself and doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. What we have now is a culture that's getting ready to repeat some of those mistakes. Certainly in the West, where you have freedoms being tamped down upon, freedom of speech, freedom of expression being shut down in the interest of compassion. I've written in my blog that the great danger of where evil is going to come from is not in the same uniform, not jackbooted and wearing swastikas. It's going to come cloaked as compassion. Our greatest virtues are often our greatest, very closely allied to our greatest vices if we overindulge them. So I'm getting a little off track, but that's a narrative, right? The narrative that we're supposed to be compassionate. Well, of course we are, but compassion, like any virtue, can be taken too far, and it's not the primary virtue. It's easier in a narrative to imagine, okay, if we just show compassion, the contingent of the Islamic world that's radical and wants to kill us will change. It's naive. We know this. It's like naive that imagining if you treat a bully nicely, he'll stop bullying you. It just doesn't happen that way. And that's real world experience, which defies the narrative. But we desire to adhere to a narrative, so we buy things, and the media gives us what we want. Which is why, as I mentioned, I think alternative media, YouTube, different people looking at different things is important for all of us to be looking objectively at things and determining together what is going on. Because one thing's for sure, stories are stories, and the real world is the real world. Never does it fit the perfect narrative structure that we want it to. We'd like it to. That would be easier. And I'm a big fan of narrative, of fiction, and obviously literature, right? And what it can teach us. It's one of the interesting things in Jan Martel's Life of Pi. He says that the true craft of fiction is creating a falsehood in order to get at the truth, which is a weird way to think about it, but that's what it is. You create a false story in order to get at some kind of deeper truth that's eluding us otherwise. So narratives are important. There's no question about that. But we have to understand the difference between narrative and reality, and that our desire to have things fit a narrative where it's an us v them, whether you're talking about, proletariat versus capital, or, oppressor oppressed, as I've talked about before. Those are neat narratives. They make for good Hollywood movies and things like that, but that's not often the reality. It's just not. It's an oversimplification, and it's an oversimplification which isn't designed, and we have a different video for this, but, which isn't designed to say, oh, the world sucks and sometimes bad things happen to good people. We all live in the world. We know that. We don't need art to tell us that. We need art to tell us how to live in that, how to deal with it. Not that that's the struggle, because it isn't. Sometimes it is, but like I say, most of life is waiting in lines, laundry and dishes, like I say. It's not huge battles and struggles. It's a struggle on each day to do the right thing, and each moment to choose to do the right thing. And the right thing isn't necessarily always the compassionate thing. If you have kids, you know this. Why societies that stop having kids, I think, have trouble, because as a parent, you know that compassion isn't necessarily always the right thing, the thing a kid needs. Not if you want them to become autonomous people, because the job of parents is to make themselves unnecessary, largely. I mean, you're still part of your kid's life, obviously, but you know what I mean. The same is true of teachers. Now, it's compassionate to keep doing things for them, but that's not the right way. You know that, because then they'll never learn to do for themselves. And more importantly, they'll never learn that failure is not the end of the world in the pursuit of success or of excellence. That's a narrative, yeah? So as we look at the media, I really encourage you to think about really exploring some of these alternative people, and in fact, a couple people who really break down the news and the narratives that are at work. And again, these are people who are on the left, or still are somewhat on the left. But mostly what they are people who are classical liberals, that is to say, more like what we might call libertarians here in the States now, who recognize that freedom of the individual is of paramount importance, and that even with the best of intentions, you can become an oppressor. Like, again, an interesting thing if you think about the narrative and how it works, the fictional narrative. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a Tolkien fan, right? The lure of the ring is that you can make the world the way you think it should be. Gandalf and Galadriel refuse it. They're good people. They mean well. But even if they were to make the world the way they think it should be, to do that, they would have to coerce other people's wills and place their narrative and their perspective on other people. And that in itself constitutes evil and oppression and coercion of other individuals. And so there's an example of a narrative, a fantasy fiction narrative, that gives us an insight and understanding into the choices in the real world, that we can't control those things, and that the desire to do it is a very, very dangerous thing. The desire to imagine that we can and should, that we have the power, and that we know what's best. Why? Because we feel like we need to affirm our system, our narrative has to be affirmed on everyone else. And that's, it's born of fear and insecurity and the very natural desire, again, for ease, for things to be simpler than they are, and they're just not. So it's incumbent upon people who are willing to engage in dialogue and discussion to look at other sources, I think increasingly now more than ever, so that we can start to hopefully change what we want as a society, so that what we're given will change in mainstream situations. As I mentioned, the Project Veritas video, CNN is a business. They want to make money. They found a group. The group wants Trump-Russia stuff. Who cares if the idea in this nation has always been you're innocent until proven guilty? I can't remember somebody, and again, you guys, as I've said many times, I'm not a huge Trump guy by any stretch. I am worried, though, that a narrative is going to undo the system of government. He was elected, okay? And maybe people were subscribing to a bad narrative when they elected him. That needs looking at, too, for sure. But regardless of your narrative, just because you really don't like someone and you're appalled at what they say or do, doesn't mean they're guilty until proven innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty, whether you're the President of the United States, an obnoxious businessman with weird moral decisions and choices in his past, or not, or just some regular politician, or the average Joe. You're innocent until proven guilty. And what we see is a narrative driving the presumption of guilt. Why? Because people want him to be guilty. Because his being elected makes us afraid, makes people afraid that their narrative of the world and of progress isn't coming true. Well, guess what? It's only our narrative. It's not how the world works. And we have to be able to accept that truth, because that's the fundamental truth. And to recognize that truth is a function of desire for us too often. And so we have to constantly be peeling back the layers that we're looking through. Each of us, taking the plank out of our own eye, however you want to put it, so that we can see more clearly what's really going on. And recognizing that it's our known innate desire that creates it. So I don't, like I said, not crucify the media, but look at ourselves. What do we want? Because we're the consuming public. And how do we help people that we know? And how do we lead people to ask further questions and to not rely on that and not let truth be function of desire, but be willing to face the truth and follow it wherever it leads. If it leads against our party, against our narrative, that's openness to growth, to change, and to the world in all its complexity. And that, I think, is a classic case of the difference between being able to do that is an instance of being able to do right, more than being forced by your own fears and insecurities to have to be right all the time. And as I say every time, doing right's a hell of a lot more important than being right. Thanks for watching. Cheers.